In this video, I spent another 100 days in my custom mod pack built to simulate life in the late 19th and early 20th centuries during an event sometimes known as the Second Industrial Revolution. With this video, the total days spent in the mod pack are brought up to 200. If you haven't seen the first 100 days video in this series, I would highly recommend watching it before this video if you want to have context for everything that's going on. Before we begin, here's a brief refresher of the first 100 days. I started a new world, mined lots of ore, killed lots of zombies, built a factory, and made a big locomotive. The challenges in the mod pack include hunger, thirst, temperature, weather, zombies, pollution, more pollution, and radiation. If you want to play this mod pack for yourself, you can head on over to CurseForge using the link in the description. Big thank you to all my patrons. Your support helps a lot, what with YouTube's ever fluctuating ad rates and algorithm. If you want to help support me directly, it's a great way to do so, and you gain access to my private Minecraft SMP server using the mod pack featured in these videos, in addition to schematics of my various builds. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more like it, then consider dropping a like and subscribing down below. I'm trying to get to 250,000 subscribers and I need your help. Thanks! I saw all the comments on my previous 100-day video telling me that I needed to make a tender for the train so that I could help prevent it from exploding when it runs out of water, and I'm pleased to say that it has not gone off like a small nuclear bomb next to my factory. At least not yet. Just kidding. You think a bomb had gone off though at my farm because most of the crops were uprooted for some reason. I assume it has something to do with either the most recent winter or all the pollution in the sky. But either way, I'm going to have to do something to fix the problem so that I don't starve to death. I looked at the various tenders I could make for my train the next day and I selected one that looked like it went with the locomotive I already had. The frame is only about 30 steel ingots instead of 120 for the locomotive, so that's nice. But I was still super low on steel and only able to make the frame and the wheels to go with it, because it needed a bunch of extra large plates which are made from steel blocks, and I was super poor in steel, because my steel production was super low, being bottlenecked by the amount of coal I could get. But how might I go about getting more coal easily? Well, I'd make an excavator and put it over a coal vein. That would work. But then I'd have to power the excavator, and I need to find the coal vein to begin with. And to power the excavator, I need oil, and so I'd have to find an oil vein, which I did actually on the first chunk that I checked. So that was pretty cool. I spent several full in-game days just checking chunks for various minerals around my base until I finally came across a coal vein, which also includes diamonds and emeralds, about 1% of each of those, in addition to 98% coal. I don't regret how long it took to find the coal vein because I found lots of other minerals and resources in the process that I'll be able to use later on. I used up all the remaining steel that I possessed to make all the materials for a pump jack so as to produce crude oil and turn that crude oil in a distillation tower into gasoline and lubricant and most importantly, diesel. There were a bunch of different chunks I could choose from to stick my pump jack on, so I just went with the most convenient one, which was a couple dozen blocks away from my factory next to the river. While trying to make power lines, I accidentally crafted my stone bricks into a ton of rocks, apparently. And I couldn't recraft them into stone bricks, so I just wasted a ton of that in making these weird things. It turned out that you could throw them at stuff, but every time I tried to throw them, it just damaged me. So they seemed pretty useless. I don't really know what to do with this other than just throw it out. I built most of a power line from my factory over to the pump jack before retiring for the night. And I was greeted in the morning by the unfriendly sight of an invasion message coming that evening. So I figured that I may as well use the time that I had to upgrade my flamethrower so that I'd be better prepared for the invasion. But once that was done, I returned back to just working on my oil processing. I made a big fluid tank to hold the crude oil while it was waiting to be distilled. Despite my upgrades, the flamethrower still works best as a lag machine, which doesn't really affect the mobs very much. It only affects me, but it definitely looks cool in 30 FPS. The mobs started fighting themselves as well thanks to a skeleton shooting a creeper in the back, which is kind of dumb, but what can you do when you're a skeleton? And late that night, almost the next morning, I turned on my pump jack and started filling up my tank with crude oil, very slowly though, because it was not getting enough power to fully operate. I wouldn't be able to do anything about my lack of power without additional raw resources, namely iron, coal, and copper. Once I secured those resources, I could return to my work of power generation and oil processing. I made another portable generator to eke out a few hundred more RF per tick from my boiler, and it was able to bring the pump jack speed up to something a little bit more reasonable, if not fully maxed out. Along with the generator and new coal came a bunch more pollution, so I figured that it'd probably be a good time to actually add in the pollution filters that I designed a filtration system for in my factory. I started out with just a diamond filter with some leaves to filter carbon, because sulfur filtering needs wool, and I didn't have a lot of wool. But I did start growing some cotton in my garden cloche, which I can turn into string and eventually wool. The next day I made some greenhouse glass using the little bit of glass that I already had on hand, and I had to go to the desert to get more sand to turn into additional glass, because my plan was to add a bunch of small greenhouses where my just open farm fields had originally been. Because when you build the greenhouses out of this actual greenhouse glass block, any crops that are directly below the glass will grow regardless of the season, and since it's indoors, it should be relatively protected from the pollution and shouldn't get uprooted all the time. I also finally got around to making a metal press, which I'm sure triggered people in the last video. I didn't do one that time, but here we go. I've got one now, and I really only made it so that I could make tin plates easily, because you can't craft tin plates the same way you can iron and other ones. By that time I'd gotten some cotton from my garden cloche, and I turned it into half a stack of wool, which I immediately turned into not pollution filtering stuff, but a set of nice woolen armor to help me not die of frostbite every single day, all day long during the winter. I made another greenhouse for more food, and I went and got a bunch of gravel from the ocean shore to use as paths near my greenhouse. I also demolished a giant fossil for tons of bone blocks for tons of bone meal. On the 16th day, I collected the tons of iron sheet metal and steel scaffolding, along with a few other things that were necessary for a distillation tower. I also discovered that my pump jack had completely filled up the fluid tank with crude oil and was just sitting there waiting to be distilled. I still need some diesel generators though, can't forget about that. I also need some food. We especially can't forget about the food. That's even more important than the diesel generators. Diesel generators take a lot of steel to make, but I had already gotten some additional steel since my latest mining trip, so I was hopeful that I'd be able to make all of the materials right away. And I was almost able to make everything, but I just barely didn't have enough steel to make the last of the radiators, so I had to wait around for half a day for my steel to smelt, but eventually I got everything I needed. The next few days I spent preparing the area for my machines. I laid down a concrete floor, and I started to make some little andesite walls for the river to make it look cool. And on day 20, I assembled my distillation tower. I worked on building 3 more fluid tanks to hold the outputs from my distillation tower, because it doesn't do me much good trying to run the tower without those tanks, because it'll just fill up the internal inventory extremely quickly and then just shut off, as you can see here. I had to mess around with the tanks a little bit to get the correct fluid into them so that it would start auto inputting, but once I did that I was able to just connect one pipeline from the tower to all the tanks, and the game just knows which fluid to put in what thing at that point, which is pretty nice. I started building stuff up on the other side of the river, which is where I'm going to put my diesel generators, and I made a pipe that extended across the river to carry diesel. And I had to make power lines that extend across the river to carry power back from my diesel generators that will soon be there to the machines that they'll be powering. I assembled the 2 diesel generators that I'd gotten the materials for several days ago on day 24, and I finished connecting up the power lines that would supply power back to the pump jack and the distillation tower. My goal was to cut off power from my factory to this area so that I wouldn't have to divert any additional power from the machines that are all the way over there. With just 1 diesel generator running, I was able to power my single pump jack and my distillation tower pretty easily, and I was accumulating a lot of diesel. But you're probably thinking, but Sbeev, don't diesel generators create a lot of pollution? And yes, they do. 1 single diesel generator is enough to pollute a part of your world semi-permanently, unless you have major pollution filtering out the sky. So how am I going to run 2, and even more later on? Well, there's a solution to that. and it first requires me to retrieve an item from the desert temple that I found in the previous video. And that item is a certain sword called the Ender. And what does that sword do? Well, among other things, it increases the mob head drop rate of mobs, like wither skeletons. My plan is to get an infinite pollution filter, which requires a nether star to activate, so I have to go kill enough wither skeletons to get 3 wither skulls, and then kill the wither. Which will definitely be easier with a submachine gun, which is what I just made here. I made a couple attachments for it to make it operate better, and I got a bunch of ammo ready to go for it, which was pretty easy because you get it from the quest because the recipe in the mod is a little bit bugged, and so you can't craft it very well normally. On day 27, I remembered how to actually load the SMG, so that's helpful. Doesn't do much good unloaded. And I was all set and ready to go to the nether fortress that I'd found in the last video to hunt wither skeletons. But wither skeletons aren't the only things I would have to fight. I would have to fight blazes as well, which are a huge pain when you're already dying of hyperthermia, getting lit on fire. I also had to fight these weird ghost things, and then there was this horrible baby ghast which obliterated me, and I decided to ignore. Luckily it didn't seem interested in coming to attack me. I did acquire 1 wither skeleton skull pretty quickly, but I realized that my sword had ran out of power, and I assumed that with the loss of power, the extra skull drops would also disappear. So I had to go back to my base and charge it up before returning to the nether. And that's when I learned that my sword can do other things when it's charged with lots of power, like shift right-clicking, teleporting you into weird places, and in my circumstance, into lava, because I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea that the sword could even do that, and so I quickly ended up in a giant lava lake. But I was able to dig down through the bottom of the lava lake and get out of the lava before I died thanks to my double row of hearts from my nutrition. Unfortunately, eating caused pollution, and the pollution had nowhere to go. And I was stuck sitting in pollution, getting every single debuff that existed in vanilla Minecraft, in addition to drowning. And since one of those debuffs was mining fatigue, I couldn't get out. So in real life, I sat there for about 10 minutes trying to figure out if there was anything I could do to not die, and when I concluded that there was literally nothing I could do, I just died, and knew I'd have to go back and get my stuff. Which failed on the first attempt thanks to a miscellaneous robot with literal aimbot. It had 100% accuracy, and there was nothing I could do, so I had to die again, and when I went back, it was gone, and I got my stuff from where I died the second time, and I made my way over the lava lake to the coordinates of my death. And since Cork, or one of the miscellaneous mods, allows me to place blocks underneath other blocks, I was able to build a little opening into the lava very slowly, all the way down to where my stuff was, and retrieve it. And once I got everything, there was nothing to do but keep grinding wither skulls. At one point, I did teleport myself into lava again, and I escaped it the same way that I did last time, only I didn't die because I was able to dig far enough down that any pollution that got created didn't suffocate me. Shortly thereafter, I got a second wither skull, but had to go back to the overworld because I was running out of food and ammunition. And there's a few things that I wanted to make that would make my job easier. For one, I thought it would be a good idea to make an advanced capacitor backpack, but it didn't go in the bobble slot, so it was completely useless because I wasn't going to sacrifice my chest plate for a backpack. So that didn't work out. But I did make the industrial squeezer presser thingy to turn rotten flesh into leather because I needed leather to make some armor upgrades. One of those upgrades being heat resistant coating, which kind of helped a little bit against fire. But the biggest thing that I needed was a railgun. Because the railgun is a long-range, powerful weapon that's basically a sniper rifle, and will shoot steel rods and a few other things, and do huge amounts of damage to mobs, which would be great for taking out the blazes that were consistently sniping me from 100 miles away. Finally, after almost 10 days spent working toward getting 3 wither skeleton skulls, I got all that I needed. I went back to my base, crafted the pollution filter frame, and I spawned the wither. That was one of my all-time easiest wither fights. The hardest part of that was just getting the skulls, and now I can run my diesel generators without fear of pollution. Day 37 was such a peaceful day after all the struggling in the nether. I tended to my bees and reset my coke ovens. I got 9 steel blocks to turn into 9 big plates, or whatever they're called, so that I could finish my train car tender, which late that night I was able to do. The next day I realized that my gasoline tank had filled up completely and was stopping the distillation tower from producing stuff because it was all backed up. So I set up this redstone automatic fluid deletion system which only deletes what can't go into the tank. I did a few storage related quests, made some storage drawer stuff. And I looked at how to make the diamond and crystal chest, and it needs a fancier crafting table than what I have and can make at the moment. So I'll have to content myself with gold chests at the moment. Since I can freely run my diesel generators now, I worked on making the materials for an excavator to automatically mine coal from that coal vein that I'd found a while ago. It took the better part of a full day to get all the materials I needed for it, in part because I had to make wires and stuff as well, and because I had to wait around for the steel blocks. But on day 41, I went to the coal chunk and assembled my excavator. And there we go. Excavator complete. I just had to connect a couple wires to the generator and my excavator was all set. There you go. You can even see it mined some diamonds right there. But the difficulty regarding my excavator and oil processing and generators and everything was only just beginning as I completed that excavator. It started as I worked to add some additional portable generators to burn gasoline to add a little bit more power to the grid. I did take a moment to look at the sky, as there was a very cool storm coinciding with a lunar eclipse. The problem though is that the singular pump jack was not producing oil quickly enough to create diesel quickly enough. I was very slowly losing diesel as I ran 2 generators at once. So I initially thought that maybe the pump jack was not getting enough power and it wasn't at 100% speed. So I worked to give it even more power, which eventually resulted in me redoing my power grid with high voltage lines. And I even went so far as to connect the outputs of both of those generators into the high voltage power line grid. Of course, my efforts were interrupted briefly by an invasion of bats that tried to kill me, so that wasn't great. Nothing I could do with the singular pump jack could make it produce enough oil, so I built a second pump jack, thinking that might solve my problem. And it did, from a certain point of view. The issue now is that with both generators running and their outputs combined, I was able to power 2 pump jacks in my distillation tower okay, but the excavator was slow now. The excavator wasn't getting enough power, and so that meant that I would need to make a 3rd diesel generator, which would mean that I need even more diesel. So I set up some lubricators to add 25% speed to both of those 2 pump jacks that were there to try to get even more oil, but I still needed a 3rd pump jack. This is the struggle that I went through for a long time, and it didn't end here. It gets worse later on in the video for other reasons. But essentially, I had to get the materials for yet another pump jack. And of course, each of these pump jacks consumes more power, a certain percentage of what I'm already making and what I can make with additional generators. I made the materials for 2 more generators at once, kind of like I did before, but I didn't assemble them quite yet. I just wanted to set up the pump jack. I will say that I got pretty efficient at assembling and tearing down these pump jacks by the end of this video for various reasons. I had to connect the lubricant tank to the auto deleter because it was filling up as well despite me using lubricant to speed up the machines. And on day 50 I built 2 more diesel generators and I turned one of them on. And that was able to power my singular excavator just fine, and it was able to power all the pump jacks, the distillation tower, and with all of that I was able to produce a net positive amount of diesel. I was kind of done with doing industrial building for a while, and I decided to work on making some different food items that I never made before, including chocolate rolls and iron brew, both of which turned out to be pretty interesting. My coal mining excavator had gotten a lot of resources by that point as well. I was able to throw it all into my crusher and get tons of stuff, especially the diamonds, which is really nice. I spent the rest of that evening just buying different seeds for new food that I wanted to grow in new greenhouses that I'd work on throwing up the next day. I also added a little chicken enclosure to automatically farm eggs so that I can make a bunch of new foods that require eggs because I didn't really have a good supply at the moment. I started growing rice and blueberries in my new greenhouse. I was going to make some food with it that evening, but I had to fight off an invasion all night long instead, which turned out to be a big pain because it was one of those invasions that included illagers that made me blind. Nice thing though is that the blindness doesn't hide the mob name tag / health bar thing, so it kind of allowed me to see them from far away and snipe them with my railgun. After the invasion, I used my eggs and blueberries to make blueberry pancakes, which are super good because they give you 4 out of the 5 nutrients in one food item, and they're not that difficult to craft once you get a bunch of eggs. I spent several days gathering resources that I needed, mainly wood, which I harvested from a destroyed section of a large forest nearby that had gotten hit by a tornado somewhat recently, and I ran around caves for a bunch of time, mainly looking for iron and copper and tin, pretty much everything other than coal, to be honest. Because I have automatic coal now, so I don't have to worry about that. It was a super successful mining trip for everything, especially iron and copper. The only problem was that I wasn't able to smelt the pulverized ore fast enough back into ingots, so I decided to make 2 additional furnaces, thereby doubling my smelting output. I found a random mule next to my base that I assume came from an invasion that consisted of hostile animals, and when I tamed it, I found out that it was extremely speedy, one of the fastest mules I've ever found in this game, which was nice because I was able to zip on over to the desert and grab a bunch of sand and start making more concrete with it. I'd prefer not to have to mine sand, gravel, and clay manually though, which is why I started working on a second excavator to put over the silt vein that I found earlier on in this video. The only problem is that my mod pack, instead of simulating life in the Industrial Revolution, decided to simulate life during peak oil. Because it turned out that my first oil vein had ran out of oil. It was only producing 6 millibuckets per tick from one pump jack. Nowhere near enough to supply everything that I needed. Before I could deal with that, I just built my excavator so I could get all the materials out of my inventory and make room for all the new stuff I'd have to tear down and reassemble momentarily. Which is what I had to do because I had to go to one of the other chunks that I had found nearby that happened to have oil in it. I tore down all of my pump jacks, all 3 of them, and I moved them over to the new oil vein, the new oil chunk, which I should mention ended up having less oil in it than the initial one, but it's better than no oil for the time being. Once I was able to turn my pump jacks back on and restart my generators, I was getting enough diesel again to do okay. But the problem was that I couldn't run all 4 diesel generators at once to power 2 excavators at once because I couldn't get enough diesel. But for some reason, the bottleneck this time was the distillation tower's crude oil input. When the distillation tower was at max energy, it distilled the crude oil into its products faster than I could get it to input crude oil. My tank that stores crude oil filled up because I couldn't get it to go into the stupid distillation tower fast enough. I even added several pumps to the output of the tank and the input of the distillation tower to make it faster, and it didn't help. And it really didn't help having to fight an invasion with more illagers and stupid diamond armor zombies, which were not fun. Hey, but at least I was able to snipe an evoker with my railgun and get a totem of undying. I also accidentally uncovered the best way to get rid of invasions. Apparently, you jump into the black hole like I did there. It flings you so high into the air that the mobs despawn. At least that's what happened to me. With my newfound ability to get both coal, diamonds, emeralds, and building materials automatically, it was time to turn my attention to my steel production. Because if I want to make a big train track with lots of rails and go a really long distance, which I do, spoiler alert, I'm gonna need a lot of steel. Way more than I can make with 3 little coke ovens that usually are too full of creosote oil to actually do anything. My first step was making an extra 6 coke ovens over by my diesel generators. The reasoning behind the proximity was that I was hoping I could connect the pollution filtering all to the infinite filter, which kind of worked out, kind of didn't. The second step was attaching fluid pumps in between the coke ovens so that I could automatically take out the creosote oil that was created and then I could pipe it into a fluid trash can and delete it, without having to worry about it filling up the inventories of the coke ovens and then shutting them off after 2 blocks of coal coke. I made this crazy giant pollution filtering system out of vents that was supposed to take all of the pollution from everything and put it into the infinite filter, and it took most of the pollution, but I'd say about maybe 30% of what was produced by the coke ovens didn't make it into the filter and instead just went into the sky. The last step in the automation was just adding some conveyor belts to automatically take out the coal coke blocks and stick it in a chest. After only about a day of processing, I got 16 blocks of coal coke, which was awesome. I immediately went and put a bunch of iron into my blast furnaces and started turning it into steel. Along with my steel smelting, I got a bunch of clay from my excavator and dumped it into my normal furnace to turn into bricks. I went over to my big casting basin thingy and worked on making a few more rail casts to turn into the rail segments, because it was about time to start working on my train tracks again and finish up that bridge and build the train station. It took a whole lot of trial and error for me to figure out how to get my train track to curve the distance that I wanted, the way I wanted, and have it all line up, because I needed it to go from the bridge all the way over to a specific spot where it would go into the train station. I added some more fuel to my locomotive so I could get it warmed up and ready to move down the track so I could actually make sure that the track was built correctly. And I learned how to properly connect my tender to the locomotive so that it would form a train, because before it wasn't actually connected. On day 67, I moved my locomotive very slowly down the track and was able to determine that I had built the curve correctly because it didn't derail or do anything weird, which was nice. Now all I had to do with the track itself was just make a little slope down a couple blocks into where the station's gonna go. I spent some time finishing up the aesthetic portion of the railway bridge, but I got interrupted, as I usually do while I'm building, by a tornado. It's just my curse, apparently, is whenever I'm doing something out in the open, like building, a tornado arrives and makes my day miserable. I'm gonna give myself a pat on the back, though, for realizing that I could just hide in my train while the tornado was there and it wouldn't suck me up. A short while later, my train bridge on the outside was all finished, and I could go and start digging out the train station and the tunnel that the train goes through, which was the most important part for me to start with, so I could bring the train inside and see how it fit and looked with everything else. I discovered, somewhat to my amusement, that the train gathers a huge amount of momentum going down even a small slope, and I went all the way through my station and crashed into the dirt wall at the end of where my tunnel was. The train itself was fine, the dirt was not fine, and I had to dig the train out and put some more track down under it before I could get it free of all the dirt. Halfway through building the entryway to my train station, my train itself reached max steam pressure, which kind of startled me because I hadn't done that before. But I've watched tutorials for the mod, and the only circumstances under which I've seen the trains exploding are when they run out of water, which my train certainly was not in danger of. A really good thing and a really annoying thing happened at the end of day 74. The good thing being that I suddenly had about 5 or 6 stacks of steel ingots. And the bad thing being, you guessed it, my pump jacks ran out of oil again, and I had to move them to yet another oil chunk. Which is pretty much what I did on day 75, is just move machines around. On day 76, I went right back to working on my train station. I'd already finished the entryway to it, but I still had to dig out and build the main platforms where you'd actually get on or off the train. I discovered that apparently you can break the train by shooting it accidentally with the railgun. At least I think that's what I did. At the back of my factory building next to the train tracks, I added a fluid tank connected to a pump that would fill it up with water so that I could easily collect it in jerry cans or buckets or whatever else I wanted to use to easily load my locomotive or tender. I discovered at one point when I tried to back my train up and out of the station that it actually lost traction on the uphill. You can see the wheels spinning right there and not doing anything. Apparently the mod can tell how much stuff you've loaded into the train, like in the tender, and it makes it so that you have to have more momentum going uphill to not lose traction. It's pretty fancy that the mod can even do that. Oh hey, there's an Alps biome in the direction of my train track going out of the station. That's pretty cool. The next day I made some grilled cheese sandwiches before being assaulted by a miscellaneous zombie that had ambled its way into my train station. Once the zombie was dealt with, I turned my grilled cheese sandwiches into something called onion soup, because for some reason you can do that, and the onion soup restores more hunger, which is good, because I had to go on a mining trip to get more iron, which means I'd be doing a lot of vein mining. I decided to go exploring farther away to try and find some caves, initially in the mesa so that I could get more gold, but I didn't find a lot there, so I flew my way across this little stretch of ocean over to this desert peninsula island thingy that had a village on it, which was pretty cool. The loot was relatively basic, just a bunch of food and some wood and stuff like that. I did manage to find a really good cave system underneath it, which had everything and more that I needed. I even found a big oil pocket. Once I got back to my base on day 89, I got a couple barrels of lubricant from my oil processing area and took them over to my factory and stuck them to an automatic lubricator to speed up my crusher because of how long it would take to crush all of the stuff that I had gotten from my most recent mining trip normally. By that point I had a lot of steel and I wanted to make a passenger coach for my train. So I worked on casting the various parts for it, starting with the frame, which is actually really long. It's a pretty big train car. Then I did the wheels, all that stuff. And the last thing it needed was just a bunch of the large plates, which are made from a block of steel each. And late that night, I was able to complete the train coach. And the really cool thing about this is it's got a full interior, and you can walk around the different compartments and everything, and look out the window. And it's all player skill, which is really cool. And if you really want, you can just walk through the various train cars into the next one. You don't have to dismount the train and get into a separate car. I continued my productivity and ran a power line to my train station where I connected it to a line of powered lanterns in the entryway, which served the dual purpose of looking really cool and preventing mobs spawning nearby. I still had about 3 more days of work left on the train station, at least the part of the train station I'm building in this video, because I'm only building about half of it, maybe even less than that, depending on how many rails I decide to put on the inside. But that'll be for different videos. I mainly had to add a few columns to the platform, which took a while because of the design I used, and I had to run a line of powered lanterns hanging from the ceiling to complete the lighting and the mob prevention. And I'm really happy with how it turned out, especially with the really high ceiling and the lanterns up there. It just looks really cool. I discovered that I had run out of diesel, which meant that I had exhausted yet another oil chunk. But I decided just to leave it for this video because there's more important things I needed to do than moving my pump checks around again. And I already had a lot of coal and other materials for my excavators. One of those important things was the discovery that I made that I was actually very close to being able to make large quantities of the thankful dinner top tier food, which restores all 5 nutrients. All I was really missing was large amounts of sugar, cranberries, and cinnamon. I took care of the sugar by sticking some sugarcane into my garden cloche to let it grow over time, and I bought a bunch of cinnamon saplings, which I grew in an orchard. I don't really know if you'd call it an orchard, but it was a grove of cinnamon trees that I was able to bone meal and get tons of cinnamon from. On day 96, I took tons of coal from my crusher and put it into my locomotive, including into the tender. I was all stocked up with tons and tons of stuff so that it could remain all warmed up and at max pressure for a long time. I also made a bunch of rail castings with a lot of my steel before moving my locomotive very slowly and carefully down into my train station. You know, I feel like I might need to make this train station even longer. I wasn't anticipating just how big that passenger coach was. And ideally, I'd want to have like 2 passenger coaches or a caboose or something. Remember how I mentioned a while ago that I want to have a really long distance railway that goes somewhere, specifically somewhere important? And remember how in the general direction that the track goes away from my train station, there is an Alps biome? Well, you see, that's where I'm going to send my railway. The Alps biome, if you're unfamiliar with biomes of plenty, is a really tall mountain biome. It basically is about as tall as the tallest mountains that you find in 1.19. The only difference is that sometimes the top of it gets a little bit funky because it reaches a 256 world height. And the reason that I want to go to an Alps biome, other than dying of frostbite all the time, is that I think it would be a really cool place to put some kind of underground facility for doing stuff in the nuclear age. I don't particularly want to have lots of radioactivity around my main base. I'll probably have a couple power generating nuclear reactors that are safe and don't generate a lot of radiation. But all the crazy stuff, all the experimentation, and the isotope generators and all that, I probably want to put somewhere far away. And what better place than a secret underground bunker facility accessed by a railway in the Alps. This is the path that I marked out in my map that the railway is going to go. It's about 3,000 blocks, which is going to be a lot of materials. I don't really know how much quite yet, but I would figure it out once I got back to my base using this very interesting method of travel. On day 99, I did some experimentation with the track blueprint to figure out exactly how many rail segments it uses per number of blocks, and I determined that for one stack of rail segments you can lay down 128 blocks of track. This then enabled me to determine that I need about a chest full of rail segments. That's a whole lot of steel, and treated wood for that matter, and gravel, although not very much gravel. It only takes a couple pieces of gravel to make the little ballast. But yeah, that's not exactly happening in this video. The only thing that is happening in this video is that, well, I spent the last bit of time that I had before the end of day 100 just building as much of the track as I could using the materials I already had. I had a couple stacks of rail segments on hand, and by nightfall of day 100 I got a few hundred blocks. I'm super excited to see my railway to the Alps operational, as I think that location is going to create a lot of really awesome opportunities for building cool things in the nuclear age. Again, if you're excited for this series and want me to spend 300 days on this world, then don't forget to drop a like and subscribe down below. But that's all for this video. Thanks for watching. Have a good one, everyone. See ya.